Rachel, welcome to the podcast. How you doing today?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me.
I really enjoyed your new book, and it's interesting. As I was doing the research preparing for this interview, I realized that this book was actually going to be a different book initially called What the Health. So let's talk
Yeah.
about that transition, where that happened along the way and why that happened.
Yeah. So originally I was writing the next sort of in the series of girl, comma books. So this was going to be Girl, What the Health? And is a conversation about women's health and the way we're often raised to believe that our health is about how we look physically. And it doesn't matter how we're doing mentally or emotionally or how we feel. Do we have energy? Any of that stuff. It's always about how we look. So it was a conversation about women and our bodies. And I tend to write with a lot of humor and a lot of irreverence. And as I was editing that book in early March, it was right when my family and I were in quarantine and we were all so fearful and unsure. And it just felt like the wrong tone. And I talked to my editor and I said, I don't think this is a conversation right now. And she said, okay, well, what would you write if you could write anything? And what I wrote is this book, Didn't See That Coming, which is about some of the most painful things that we experience in our lives are often things that came as a shock, like this pandemic.
Right. And how quick was the turnaround time on that? Because this book came out in September and we're talking like 6 months ish here. And how long of a time frame do you typically take to write a book?
So, secret fact, I always write my books very, very fast. Even if an editor gives me 18 months, I'm going to knock it out in the last 6 to 8 weeks. And it's just my process, it's just how I work. Oftentimes, if I want, like even earlier in my career before I had book deals and I would want to finish something, I would give myself a tight turnaround because I really don't believe that a book is great until you've edited it 10 times. So I don't put a ton of pressure on that first draft, but I know that I'm never going to get a book in the market unless I can get a first draft done. So it's like a meat cleaver, like hatchet, I just go super hard. There's no finesse to it. I just get it done. So I wrote it in about the first draft in about 6 weeks. And then we had a really accelerated editing process in order to turn it around inside of 2020.
And the original book, is that being shelved now for release down the line, or what's happening with that?
It's such a it's such a timely question. My editor's asking the same thing. So right now it's slated to come out early 2022, but it's a conversation about health, but I think it will end up being a bigger conversation, not just sort of where I started, but expanding on all of the paradigms that we as women kind of buy into and are taught to believe. And that's just because I'm always writing about my understanding of the world around me, and I am ever evolving, as are you, as are any of your listeners. And so I think that the book that you concept 2 years ago, or maybe, gosh, it could be even more, it's going to have to shift and change from what it originally was.
I want to take time now and go back and go through your entrepreneurial journey. And I know this is a long one. You've been involved in being an entrepreneur for 17 years.
Right?
And I've
Just
heard
about to be 18.
amazing. Congrats. Being
Thank
able
you.
to endure through the ups and downs, and I'm sure there's been lots of them, and we can probably get into a few of them. But let's go back to the beginning. Let's talk about before you became an entrepreneur. What were you doing at the time?
Oh gosh. Well, I was working as a coordinator at a production company. So I moved to Los Angeles from my small town when I was 17. I graduated high school a year early, got a job immediately. So I didn't go to college, just immediately started working. And I sort of moved my way up from an assistant to a coordinator. And gosh, I was 20 at the time. And because I was in the entertainment industry, had a series of really crappy bosses. And was just dreaming of what it would be like to own my own business. And it's crazy in retrospect because I don't come from a family of entrepreneurs. So I don't even know what I had seen that made me think that was possible, especially at such a young age. But I had a really awful human that I worked for, and I quit my job on a Friday and I started my company Monday morning, that next Monday morning. And I just worked my butt off. I just worked so freaking hard because two reasons. One, I didn't want to go back to working for someone again. And two, I was just about to get married. Yeah, I was just about to get married. And my soon to be husband was like, well, you just gave up your salary, whatever. What are we gonna do? And I remember my job was paid me $38,000 a year, and my only goal those first 12 months was to make back the salary that I had earned, and I earned 7 or $800 more than my annual salary and felt like I was the biggest success in the entire world.
Good for you. It's interesting how we can stretch as a person to what our goals are, what we, set out to do.
Absolutely. And I think that most of my successes in life are jumping into the deep end and learning how to swim once I get there. I think there's a certain amount of audacity that you have to have, like the boldness, the courage to just believe that you are capable of a wild idea or writing a book or starting a podcast or whatever it is. And just that belief can sort of push you into this place where you're like, all right, it's sink or swim. We're here. Let's see what we can do.
And sometimes it can come from a place of being unhappy, like in your case, where you were working for somebody that you weren't happy there, and you can almost, want to go back and thank that person because I mean, if you were in a mediocre job and the money was okay, and who knows if you would have had that nudge to make the move when you did.
Yeah. Most of my friends who are entrepreneurs have a similar story. I don't know a ton of people who had this big vision of what they wanted to build and then they built. Most people I know just wanted to be sort of the master of their own fate and be able to be in control. And I think often when you make that leap and you don't know what the heck you're doing, because most of us don't when we try, you end up accidentally just getting a really expensive job instead of actually having a business. You think, oh, I'm going to build a business, but because you're a solopreneur most of the time and because you're wearing all the hats and you're doing all the things, you get this job that might hopefully is giving you some kind of a salary, but also is incredibly taxing on your energy and your time, but you're not actually making any traction because the business can't exist without you. And therefore, it's not a business, it's just a job. So it takes a really long time to kind of learn how to separate those two things to build something that is truly a company that can thrive without you having to be at the center of it.
Well, it's interesting. I've heard you talk about this before where you are the product, but you're also in behind the scenes running the show as well. So it's an interesting dynamic there and balancing of the two.
Yeah, it's incredibly difficult. And I think anybody who's listening who has a small business or is an entrepreneur, or even just a side hustle that you're dreaming of growing into something bigger, will understand what that feels like. I really don't think that I would ever have gotten to the financial success that I have today if I hadn't understood that I needed a team around me, that I needed people who are smarter than I am, that I needed, others to help make. I'm referencing like they're not all working from home right now. I'm like, oh, this big office that I pay for that nobody can come to. But it took me a while to understand how necessary that was. But I think what I didn't know back then that is so crucial to anybody in that role and honestly even still today with the company I have today is the success or failure of your company I think has so much to do with your health. And I'm not just sort of giving it an easy thing because this is the podcast, but I don't yes, physical health and that matters certainly. Do you have the energy to do what it is you want to do? But I also think emotional health and emotional maturity have everything to do with the health of your business. Like, I believe that the leader of a company, or frankly, the leader of a family, that their mental, emotional, physical health is directly correlated with the health of the team, the company, the group, the family that they're trying to lead. So I'm really mindful always of if I want this to thrive, then I have to make sure that I am thriving.
And what are some of the essentials in your day-to-day life that you need to do to make sure you're the healthy leader in your family and in your business?
Okay, so this is so perfect. Okay, hold on, let me grab something off my desk. So last night I did this coaching. I used to do this in 2019 every month, and I stopped doing it because it's frankly, it's emotionally exhausting. But I did this coaching last night for my community because it's just a new year and 2020 was so hard, and I thought that it could be a valuable thing. So what coaching looks like for us is thousands of people from all over the world come together. It's live for 2 hours. And last night I taught on not just I typically am known for like how to achieve a goal. Here's what you're going to do. And that's still me. But last night I taught a lot on what it looks like to take care of yourself, to be present, to make sure that you're actually living a life that you want to live, that you're not just chasing the goals and the achievement and the success, and along the way you're totally miserable and totally burnt out and telling yourself, oh, but once I get to the top of the mountain, or once I make $1 million, or once I do these things, then I'm going to feel better, because it's not true. So I just happen to have a list because I made this for them last night. Let me find it in my
All right,
notes.
let's get into it. And I'm curious too, along your journey, have you learned this lesson the hard way? Have you had periods of
Yes,
time where it's been go, 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 grind, and then you're
a
like
million
bottoming
percent.
out, and then you realize I got to almost double down on those self-care routines to get myself back to baseline?
Yes.
Let's start
So,
there. Talk
okay.
about getting to that rock bottom. You can share one or multiple examples and how you ended up getting back out of that.
Well, so do you know, are you familiar with the Enneagram?
I've heard of it. I it's not
Okay.
something I've delved into.
When we are done, please Google Enneagram. If you're listening, please Google Enneagram. There's free tests that you can take. So, the Enneagram is a personality test that goes back to ancient Greece. It's been around forever. It's personality types 1 through 9, and I always recommend it to people. I know there's so many different kinds out there, but that one, I just don't know a better test that you feel like you're reading a diary. You're like, "How'd you know?" So, on the Enneagram, I'm a 3, which is called, because they each have like a name, the 3 is called the achiever. So, from the time I'm a little girl, I'm constantly trying to sort of hustle for my worth and show you what I can do and all the things.
Sounds
And
a lot like myself.
okay, so maybe you're a 3 too. So I that has served me really well in terms of financial or business or relational success, and it has at times really hurt me in terms of health. Because I will, like most achievers, I will run myself ragged. I will go to full burnout. I will do anything in pursuit of achieving the goal. So for the longest time, I was working in obscurity, honestly. People see my success now and they're like, you came out of nowhere. I'm like, oh my gosh, I am an overnight success after working at it for a decade. So, 2018, beginning of 2018 was when what a lot of people think is my first book was not my first book, but was actually my sixth book, which goes back to that obscurity. So, when my sixth book just was a viral, crazy, lightning in a bottle kind of thing. I want to say that title has sold 5 million copies in 2 years. It's bananas.
I wanna
And
come back to that and what made
okay.
that book viral. But go ahead.
um, so 2018 happens, and then I I that was wild, and that was sort of a catalyst, not sort of, that was a catalyst for this other dream I had always had, which is I am a speaker, I'm a communicator, I'm a teacher, and I had been doing that on small little stages and conferences, and I'd always dreamed of having that be a way that I might be able to make money, especially because there aren't a ton of women doing sort of the style that I'm doing or teaching on business, and I really craved seeing a woman in that role, and here we are. So the book hits. I've always wanted to be a speaker, and all of a sudden, everybody wants me to speak. And this is amazing. And I've been living in sort of scarcity for a very long time. Like, I've been hustling for years, years and years and years. And so I don't know a world where you just consistently have incoming great stuff. So I say yes to everything. oh, you want to speak there? And then, oh, and then I'm going to fly to London and then I'm going to come back over here to Jersey. And I'm just tickled pink that anybody wants to talk to me. And, then I started to have to travel and I made a really terrible mistake in that I let someone else handle those bookings. And, a couple months later when I started to feel really tired and, I was like, "Man, this is a lot. How many more speaking gigs do I have to do, before I'm done?" And I looked at the calendar and, started crying because I was on the road every week, and I have 4 kids. And, I have a company and I have all it was absolutely insane. And so I'm experiencing what for so many years for me was this dream, this success, because I'm getting the chance to communicate and also I'm experiencing the financial impact of that and I'm miserable. Like, so hard, and I you have to know, I am the most my whole life, I am the most positive person. Yes, I get pissed off, and I have bad days, and I have sad days, but for the most part, I constantly am trying to find joy in a situation, to keep my energy up, to be so I'm experiencing the disappointment of what my schedule now looks like, and also having to go on stage and speak for 2 hours to 10,000 people and travel, and it's just wild. So, unfortunately, by the time I realized what we were in, I still had another year in front of me because speaking gigs book out for ages. I had another year in front of me and no way to turn that around. And people said like, "Oh, you could cancel or you could," and even though I didn't sign those contracts, people thought like that's my word. You have my word that I'm going to be somewhere, and maybe you invested a ton of money in having me as a speaker so that you could try and sell tickets to your event. Like, no way I'm going to disappoint people. So, I was miserable. And so I know what it's like to sort of experience all your wildest dreams and you're not even living half a life. You're living nothing. You're coming home from the road and then doing everything that you can to be present for your family and then falling into exhaustion because you're toast. So
Would your
that was
family travel with you in the early days?
no. My kids are pretty little. I mean, especially back then. And there's also the sometimes I've taken my older boys on business trips, but there's also the added this is weird, but the also I don't know how I don't know what it does like psychologically to kids to maybe see their mom like, "Oh, here's 20,000 people," and you're watching that. And at the time, it was such a wild the response because of the book, and people were so emotional, and they'd be sobbing, and they'd be screaming, and they'd run up to me at the airport, and it just didn't feel like the kind of thing I wanted to bring my kids along for, to be honest with you.
But you must have been so proud of yourself working so long to get to this point. And obviously, your kids, you want them to, see your success after you've worked so hard and accomplished this big thing. So it must have been kind of like this double edged sword where it's like you want them to see what's happening, but also you want to protect them in a way too.
Yeah, it was, and it is, and I think actually for me, I definitely wanted the kids I mean, my daughter's still she's only 3, so she'll get this opportunity at some point, but I definitely brought my boys along more on business trips, more into meetings or certain situations that they could even understand this is a big deal, and my kids are great and they, sit there respectfully and you'd be surprised how many executives are willing to let you take a meeting like that once they know the intention why. But it was really important for me and still is for my boys especially to see a woman being a boss and being awesome and doing things that maybe they only ever saw their daddy do. So I more brought them along on things like that, not so much fame. And I guess that's the piece that feels a little that makes me nervous is that my 2 oldest are in middle school and my 8-year-old even my 8-year-old knows YouTube and gamers and stuff like that. And so I feel like my kids and their friends are already very aware of fame and people who are famous and people who have social followings, and um I just don't ever want to aggrandize that for them. I don't want that to be something that they aspire to, and they already do. Like every kid I know is like, "Oh, I want to have a YouTube channel or whatever." So I'm trying my best to not. I feel like if they see a bunch of screaming fans, that's not going to help my story. That's not what we should be chasing in our lives.
Well, it's interesting because you are doing what the ideal is for a lot of kids, like you just said, being a YouTuber, being an online influencer. So, how is that for young kids when they see their mom doing that? Do they look up to you like, oh, this is so cool? Or do they kind of look like, oh, mom, what do you know what I mean? Like, is it still cool because mom's doing that?
I don't know if they think it's very cool. I mean, I think I try and not take myself very seriously. If you saw the last thing I posted on Instagram, you'll understand why. And so I more will show them things like that. Like I want them to see me being silly or, intentionally looking crazy or something. But yeah, I last weekend was my oldest. He asked to go paintballing for his 14th birthday, and that felt like an activity that we could safely accomplish. There were, I want to say, 7 or 8 kids and me, and we all had double masks, and then we had the paintball masks, and we're outside and we're socially distanced. Like I felt like it was a birthday celebration I could pull off safely. But even in that, they were talking about, having Instagram or, "Oh, how many likes did you get?" And it freaks me out so bad because my kids want that so desperately, and I won't let them have it. And, I'm like, "Oh, mom, you're the worst." And I'm like, "I know what it's like. I know what it feels like. I'm 38 and people still can say something that hurts my feelings, and I don't think that's healthy. And so you definitely don't need to be doing that at 12." We all middle school is hard enough. Why would we add that into the mix?
I want to come back to the part of your story when you start really speaking a lot, you're on tour, you're overbooked. Coming back to that point after working so hard and finally having this success you'd worked towards, you talked about how you felt like you're overbooked and you probably at the time wanted to take a step back, but you felt loyal to, the people that had booked themselves at these events and such. But did you feel a little bit of scarcity too? Because it had taken so long to get there. It's like I can't slow down. I'm finally where I've wanted to be. And maybe you even still feel that these days, even after you've been successful, quote unquote, for a number of years and you have a huge following and things are, from the outside look like everything. I mean, we all have our things. We're going to get to some stuff that you've been through in the last year, but you have a lot going for you. So for you, do you ever feel like you can take the pedal off the gas back then or now?
Yes. Now. Not then. And the interesting thing is I had way more money coming in then than I do today. Um, I I grew up without much. I grew up without money, and more than that, I grew up with, it was the biggest issue in my parents' marriage, and my parents' marriage was very volatile and screaming fights and punching holes in the wall, and it was a lot of fear in my childhood, and it always was revolving around money. And so, I heard Tyler Perry say once, "If you've ever been hungry, then you'll never be full." And I think that that was my story for a very long time, that it felt like, "Oh, this can be taken away," and my biggest fear as a mom would be that my children experience what I experienced in terms of, there not being food in the fridge or not knowing how we were gonna, pay rent or something. And, so I think that that's sort of where the hustle and the drive came from. And definitely there was scarcity in, well, gosh, I can't believe that I ever could make this much money doing this thing. And so I can't say no. And so I'll just keep saying yes and yes and yes, regardless of not only what it does to me, but if anybody in your audience is listening and they are entrepreneurs or they dream of building a brand, also what it did to my brand. Because there were some times that we were going so fast and like you're on this stage and you're in this place, and I would show up and be like, "What is this event?" Like I this This sounds so terrible, but I'm gonna guess that none of them are listening. One time, and this was not kidding, like the height of the success of my book. Like I'm on the Today Show, I'm doing the things, and I was moving so fast at that point that I wouldn't even really prep for a keynote until the night before. So I'd land wherever I was speaking and I'd prep and then I'd go. And the night before, I realized that I'm speaking at like the grocers the produce grocers of America or something like wild. And I don't know if you have any idea the kind of keynotes I give, but I typically speak to entrepreneurs. I'm like, motivation, let's go. And I'm guessing that like someone on like the produce grocers of America committee loved my books and just wanted to book me, even though I had no business being there speaking to these people. And it's just like crickets. Like, I'm like, come on, guys, let's go. Like, they're nothing. They're like, we care about organic cilantro. We are not interested in what you're talking. It was so it's not just a detriment to your spirit and your energy and what you're trying to do. It also can be a detriment to your brand and what it is you believe that you're building.
I want to come back to what we were talking about earlier, the virality of your book. What do you think it was at that time that, after you said you had done 5 or 6 books up until that point, nothing really caught fire? This book all of a sudden explodes. What's different? Are you writing along the same themes, same kind of writing? What changed?
Definitely the first time I had stepped into the nonfiction space. So I started in fiction, and I think that was an incredible learning experience to move into nonfiction because even when I was writing nonfiction, I try and write in a way that would hold your attention the same way that characters in a fiction story might. And I try and be creative with, you know, I think great fiction writers can speak to you not just with the words that they're saying, but even the structure of the page or how it flows. And so that definitely was a great lesson. So it was the first time I did nonfiction. Also, I've been in community with my community for, gosh, no, I started, what year are we in? So 2008, 2007, 2008. So it's been a really long time. And by the time that book came out, I had been talking to her, my reader, my customer, my community for years and years and years. So I knew her struggles. I knew what she was worried about. I knew her stressors, and a lot of them were mine as well. So I really wrote a book where each chapter were the things that I knew my reader was dealing with the most. Issues like with body image, feeling like she was a bad mom, feeling like she wasn't comfortable with her sexuality, feeling like she was a bad person or she needed to look a certain way, or just all the stuff. I put it all in there, and I think I also had just the freaking luck to have stepped into that space. Now it's so common and normal on Instagram for people to be authentic and share their truth and show their stretch marks and talk about all the things. But when I wrote that book, that was not common practice. People did not talk about peeing their pants and back fat and struggling in their sex life. And like, people didn't say that. Now, sure. But back then, I think it was kind of shocking to people, which also kind of helped. What is really special about Girl Wash Your Face, to me, the most special thing, is that that book was not an immediate bestseller. And that's what a lot of people don't know. I had this dream of being a New York Times bestseller, and here's my 6th book, and I'm thinking maybe this time, because that's what you do when you're an author. You're like, maybe this one. And it came out, and it wasn't on the list because it didn't. It was okay. It wasn't selling great, and I sobbed. I was so devastated. My dream again. I lost it. I didn't do a good enough job. All that stuff. And every week it would start to sell more and more and more, and women would pass it to friends and buy it for their sisters, and it just kept growing. So that hit the list something like 13 weeks after it came out. It took a minute, and that's a pretty unique thing that I'm really proud of.
And if I have the story right, you ended up getting denied by a publisher and released that book independently. And I think it was like, what, 6 months later, they ended up deciding to pick it up.
Well, so that was my first fiction book. So that's the
Got
book
it.
that
Okay.
launched my career. But I will say I had a publisher, and when you have a publisher, they typically have first right of refusal for the next thing you do. And so I did pitch that, give that idea to my existing publisher, and they turned it down because they're like, we don't get it.
Were you
And I,
always Sorry,
sorry,
that's hilarious, but were
that
you
was,
always
yeah,
comfortable talking about these things that you were being so open and vulnerable about? Like you said back fat and sex and different things at that time
right.
that was so, not something people were willing to be vulnerable about. Like what was it
Yeah,
about you? Was that just your nature or did you have to push into
no,
that?
no. So I was a blogger. That's really how I got my start as a writer. I started the blog, I want to say the end of 2007, early 2008. And I, as a blogger, wrote every day for women. And maybe 5 people read it in the beginning, but I wrote every day. And I was writing about casserole recipes and, throw pillows and nothing very special. And then I got Bell's palsy, which is facial paralysis. I've actually had it 3 times. And so I had facial paralysis. And so this whole half of my face hangs, like an inch lower than this side does. I had to wear an eye patch. It's very, very painful and also just not pretty. And when I got better, I thought, I'm going to write about this because I couldn't find a lot of information on the internet. And I decided I'm going to write about it. And I had pictures. And so I wrote a blog and I put these pictures on there. And I remember I had hired a little PR firm at the time for my blog, and they called me in a panic. They were like, "Get this down. Pictures last forever on the internet. You do not want these on the internet." And my husband at the time was like, "You do not want this. Like, don't put this out there." And honestly, if you Google it, I'm sure you can still find those pictures. But almost immediately, I started getting comments from women all over the world who were thanking me. Like, I have this too. I can't find information. Thank you for being honest. Here's my picture. Here's what I look like. And it was the first time that I realized, like, oh, people really they want this, because you have to remember at that time that was like when blogging was exploding. That was really when we started to get into this influencer picture perfect life filter, everything's great. And so again, it was kind of this, it was contrary to maybe what people were seeing. So when I saw that was when I kind of started to dip my toe in the water and see. I heard Rob Bell once say, like, that stuff that you don't want to admit and that stuff that embarrasses you and the stuff that you're like, there is no way that I can put this out there. He's like, that is the exact thing that the world needs to hear. So I just try and lean into that.
And when the world hears it, do you find it's as painful as you would assume going into it? Like once you release, certain pictures to the internet and stuff like that, do you realize soon after, like, that wasn't such a big deal? This is
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's like, I don't know, if I'm willing to put something out there, I sort of release it into the world. And the interesting thing about the state of social media today, and I would say over the last 2, 3 years, is I really don't know, at least for me, I'm sure everybody approaches this differently, but I don't think that I can create in the social media space if I consume any of the feedback to it, good or bad. So if you love it or if you hate it, I have no idea. And I think that that's the only healthy way for me to be able to create, because I think it's deeply unhealthy if I sit in the adulation of people saying how great I am. And I think it's deeply unhealthy if I allow the opinions of strangers to hurt my feelings. So it's like, honestly, once I put it out there, it's kind of, it's gone. It's not something that I'm thinking about or worrying over.
Let's go a bit deeper into this. I'm curious. So, in the beginning, when you're starting your, say, Instagram account, at that time, would you look at comments and respond back? Was this something you've evolved into like just more recently, or talk
Totally.
about the evolution there?
Yeah, well, in the beginning, I'm this little blogger and I have like 5 followers. And when I say community, I mean community. Like, I know still to this day, I have women from the old days who will come to my conferences and it's me, and then there's maybe 3 members of my staff who've been with, I keep referencing them like they're here, who've been with me for years and years and years. We know them. We know Mary. We know Jenny Lynn. We know these people because they've been a part of our crew, because as a blogger back in the day, that's what you did. Someone, "Oh, Jesse, oh, did you tried it with the peaches? How was it good? Did you oh, you did a little cinnamon. Okay, I'm gonna try cinnamon next time." Like, that was the relationship. It was very normal and honestly feels like such a much more pure and beautiful time on the internet. And yeah, that's how it started for me. So that was very common. And then when that started to shift truly was when I started to have more success and the platform got bigger. Because with any kind of success, I think there are people who are just not going to like me. That's cool. I'm not for everybody. But suddenly it wasn't just about what's the work you're doing or the things you're saying. It's like, oh, now also there are people who are truly following you just because they don't like you, because that's just part of it. So yeah, so I had to learn to not consume that because I also don't think it's healthy. I don't want to get into a fight with an internet troll. I think that's a waste of both of our energies. I don't I and I also I wish I could tell you that none of it bothers me, but sometimes it does. Sometimes like I was telling you about what's it called? My kids and my 2 sons have TikTok. That's the app that they're allowed. Their friends are on it and they're on TikTok. And I have said to my kids a million times, though this probably was like dangling a carrot, don't ever Google me. Don't Google me. Don't Google daddy. Don't Google us because you're gonna find people being mean. And it's such a weird thing to have to tell your kids that. But literally last night, I came home and my 12-year-old was like, "Oh, I was trying to find one of your videos on TikTok and I searched your name," and he found someone who had made a TikTok making fun of the fact that I got divorced. Like, imagine your kid finding a video that and it's like, this person doesn't know me, but it's like it's fodder, right? It's funny to make fun of whatever, and I guarantee she doesn't realize that someday my 12-year-old son is gonna watch the internet making fun of the fact that his parents got divorced, which is so insane, and, he's 12, so he looked at the comments, and it was just people adding on, and I was like, I'm thinking, "Oh god, the therapy this kid is gonna have to go through." So I'm like, "What'd you think?" And he's like, "Oh, whatever. Like, who cares? What he I would honestly, I was like, "Wait, say it," because he said some line that was so good, and I still can't remember. I need him to write it down. And I was like, "Wait, say that again?" 'Cause I'm like, "I need that. I'm bothered by what has happened here." And he was just like, "Whatever. Like, no, no worries. Like, let them. You're fine. That girl wishes she could have a book." I'm like, "Okay, 12-year-old. But what is this life? This is crazy."
Well, it's good you can laugh about it, which reminds me of reading your book and hearing about which you'll need to give a little bit of context to this, but laughing at funerals and other situations that are, emotionally draining and not positive situations. So talk about how that's actually something that can be used as a strategy in times of discomfort.
So, I grew up, I'm the daughter of a Pentecostal minister, and I'm the granddaughter of a Pentecostal minister, and my family's Southern and of Irish descent. And all of that is prep to say that where I come from, if you know someone who passed away, you're going to the funeral and you're bringing a casserole with you. Like, that's just our culture. It's a sign of respect where I grow up that, this is we go. So from a very early age, I started attending funerals and I've been to a lot of funerals. And I don't know if that sort of coupled with the fact that I had some pretty hard things happen in my childhood, I just developed this attitude toward painful things, and honestly, a lot of the members of my family have the same sort of gallows humor of in the most awful, hardest situations, we tell some of our best jokes. I mean, we it's like stand-up comedy graveside. And some people find that so offensive and hurtful, and I honestly have to wonder how much loss you've experienced if you find it hurtful, because I think that trying to find some levity in the most awful moments is this reminder that you're even still alive. And it doesn't mean that we're also not weeping. It doesn't mean that we're not holding the pain, but I just from a really early age remember, like, them is some giving a eulogy, and they would slip jokes in about this person, and it sort of broke the tension in the room. So, yeah, it was one of the things that I talked about in the book was this idea that you're gonna have to hold this pain, whatever it looks like for you, this grief or this pain or this loss. And so if you're gonna have to hold the pain, find moments to laugh. Find moments to laugh even in the hard stuff.
That makes sense. And Rachel, early on in the conversation, you went and grabbed that paper. You're going to go
Oh,
over some of the health and
I
wellness things
forgot.
you would do to get through the tough times and what you're doing for self care. So let's get into that.
Okay, so my this is my recipe. So I feel like we all have a recipe in life for when we are feeling our best. So for you, for listeners, for anybody, there are times in our life where we're like, man, I really had energy and I was feeling good and I was the dad I wanted to be and I was the brother I wanted to be and I was all of these things, and then I'm not that way anymore. And oftentimes if you challenge someone, you're like, okay, are you doing the same stuff you were doing then? It's like, well, no. Okay. So if you can look back on a time when you felt better or maybe had more energy or felt like you were living and being healthy the way you want to live, and ask yourself what was the equation for that, then you can replicate it. And so this is my recipe or my equation. So I feel the best, the healthiest, the most energy, vibrancy, passion, all of it when I have a morning routine. My morning routine is the most sacred practice in my life. I do it every single day of the week, and I've done it for years. And I think it's so essential, especially if you have kids, because you're gonna, as soon as they wake up, it's them, not you. And so I think a morning routine is such a beautiful opportunity to ground yourself before you jump into serving others. So
And
my morning
Rachel,
routine, yes.
let's get into the morning routine a little bit and
Yeah,
then we'll
that's what
go
I was
through the
just
list.
gonna tell
So
you.
getting into that, you mentioned getting up and doing that before the kids. Do you set an alarm to do that or do you
Yes.
naturally wake up? Yeah.
No.
What time would you get up?
5 a.m. every
Okay.
day.
Take
Yep.
us through that. You get up at 5 a.m. Are you staying in bed for 10, 15 minutes and just kind of breathing and cherishing the moment, or do you pop right out?
So typically I pop right out, but I'm not gonna lie to you, in the winter, it is very cold here, and I definitely will lay there a little bit longer. So I'll lay there for 10, 15 minutes where I'm just like, I'm not sleeping still, but I'm just like hesitating against the cold. So our alarm goes off at 5, and I've pre-programmed my coffee, which I think is so essential. Like if the coffee wasn't going, I don't know that I would get out quite so quick. But I go grab my coffee and then I come back to a chair in my room. I sit in the same chair every single morning. And my morning routine has adjusted over the years to accommodate whatever's happening in my life. But right now, most of these have been here for ages. But I always do a guided meditation. I always do gratitude practice. I insist that my morning routine be in solitude. I journal. I do 2 pages of journaling. And I will tell you the solitude piece. I'll explain that a little bit better. My 8-year-old loves getting up in the morning too. He loves that when he gets up, he and I are the only ones awake. And so he wants me to wake him up at 5 a.m. and he would be fine, but there's no way. I'm like, nope, this is my time. And I wake him up at 6:30. So I have from 5 to 6:30 until kids are involved, but solitude is a key for me.
Nice. And I think there is some value in that time when you are laying in bed. I know for me, it gives me time to think and process different things in my mind that I'm a busy entrepreneur too, and my days are go, go, go. I have a young child, and there's a lot I'm always thinking about, and the days just, they just scoot on by. So for me, taking that 10, 15 minutes, I do something similar where I can really process a lot of my thoughts that during the busy day might not have time to get acknowledged to that level.
Yeah, I love that. That's what I'm doing when I'm journaling. So journaling to me feels like a little bit of therapy, and I tend to work out whatever might be bugging me or I'm unsure about. It's great because then I'm working it out before I ever interact with another human being. So that time's super essential. Um,
All right, so we went through the morning routine.
yes,
Let's
morning
keep on
routine.
to the list here and see what else you're getting into.
So this one sort of we're just gonna call bucket health, but great nutrition, supplements, and great sleep. So
Okay, let's
that's like a
pause there again.
combo pack.
Okay, I want to get
Okay.
into nutrition. What does Rachel Hollis eat on a typical day? Do you follow a certain diet, like a
No.
paleo, vegetarian?
Mm-mm.
No.
No.
What do
So
you
I
eat?
just tend to eat whole foods. So I just tend to eat foods the way they came. I eat a lot of protein, fruits and vegetables, nuts, seeds is I would say 85% of my diet. And then I definitely have fun. Like typically I wouldn't do this in the middle of the day, but my kids, my oldest is doing distance learning, and for his class he had to make pan dulce for his Spanish class. And so he was making these like delicious fresh bread rolls and that were coming out of the oven right before I was coming to talk to you. And I had like a giant yeasty bread roll with butter. That is not my diet, but that's beautiful. My child just made fresh freaking bread, like did the whole thing, kneaded it, let it rise. Like I was like, heck yeah, this is what I'm having for lunch. So I'm really graceful with myself, but I typically eat whole foods.
Nice. And I totally agree. There's got to be room for flexibility. Special instances like that, it's like you can't miss that. So let's go into supplements. I'm very curious in this realm. I know one of them I've heard you talk about is holy basil or tulsi.
Yes.
Talk about that, and is that it sounds like that's still in the mix.
I feel a little like crazy, but I cannot over exaggerate um, how much this has helped me. So holy basil leaf is an adaptogen, and there's all sorts of adaptogens out there that are available for y'all. Ashwagandha is a really popular one. Rhodiola, like there's all sorts of things, but I really that one is the best because I have never felt it affect me. Like I'm super sensitive to medication. And so it's stuff that should they're like non-drowsy and I'm asleep for 3 days. So I love that one because I don't feel any effects unless I stop taking it. When I
I
stop
love
and
it.
you're right, and I
I'm a
didn't
huge fan.
know. Okay, so you take it too.
I do it through tea form. So at night,
Yes.
oftentimes, I'll make a tea out of it. I'm
Yes.
curious if that's what you do or use capsules, or I know there's tinctures. But for me, it
Yeah.
is the one thing, like caffeine, obviously, you talked about your morning coffee. That is
Mhm.
something we can all feel and know when we
Yes.
consume it. There's not a lot of other things that don't have caffeine in them, like teas and drinks we can have. But holy basil, it just really grounds me. As soon as I have that first
Yes.
sip, it's like there is something here. So talk more
Mhm.
about how do you consume it?
So I take it's in my supplement stack, so I take a pill at night, but my favorite teas, this company called Big Heart Tea that I love out of St. Louis, I think it's a woman-owned business. It's really cool. You guys should check it out. I when there are brands that I really love, especially if they're woman-owned, often I'll just reach out and be like, "Hey, let me take a call with you. Let me be helpful. Let me answer questions, whatever." So I did this with them recently, and I was talking to her, she's really into herbal medicine, which I love, and I was asking her questions, and I said, "What do you think about adaptogens?" And she kind of smiled and looked at her partner, and she was like, "Oh, there's tulsi in all of our tea." She's like, it's there listed on the label, but we don't advertise it because we just didn't know if people would even know what adaptogens are." And I was like, I have the tea every night, and me and my kids, that's what we drink in the wintertime. Like when we're watching a movie or something, we have it every night. And for the last like month, I'm like, man, I am feeling so good lately. And I'm like, oh, you're doubling your holy basil. So I'm a big fan.
Nice. Well, let's continue on the supplements. What other ones are part of that stack?
So I take a group in the morning and a group in the evening. And the morning has, just stuff that different nutritionists have recommended over the years when they were looking at blood work. But I take lysine, vitamin C, vitamin B, vitamin D, a general sort of all the things, turmeric. I think that might be it for the morning. And then the evening is I take magnesium, I take the holy basil, um, more turmeric, I don't know. There's like a bunch of random things that I sort of add to over time. I'll try, like recently a nutritionist was like, "Hey, I think that you might need, more of this." And I have to test it because like I said, I'm pretty sensitive. And then if I still feel good, then it just becomes part of the regimen.
That makes sense. And the
Yeah.
other thing you mentioned there is sleep, and you mentioned getting up at 5 a.m. So are you going to bed quite early, or
Yes, I
what
am.
does the nighttime routine look like for you? Again, I know you
uh
have kids, so you have a lot going on in the family,
yeah.
and how does the wind down look?
So I'm very organized as a parent. I'm very organized and we are on a schedule and it is it's not even something that we argue about or that is confusing. They all kind of know what it is. So the kids are in bed, everybody's in bed by 9, which means that I am in bed by 9:30. And sometimes if I'm lucky, I can even get in bed a little bit before 9:30, but I'm in bed and lights are out. Even if it takes me a while to fall asleep, that's better for me because if I sit there bored, I'm likely gonna start doing something that's gonna wake my brain up, and if my brain wakes up at 9:30, I am in trouble. So yeah, so I'm in bed at 9:30.
And do you ever read at night before bed, or do anything like that to settle down?
Yeah, but if I'm reading, nonfiction only, and I'm reading a physical book because a screen will also wake me up.
Nonfiction. Doesn't that get your brain going at night, do you find?
Not as bad as fiction.
Oh, okay.
Fiction will make me I'll just be like, "Oh, just one more chapter."
You get stuck in it, I
Nonfiction, I'm
see.
like, "Okay, I learned about that thing, and I can close this, and I'll come back tomorrow."
That makes sense. Let's continue on the list. Anything else on there we need to cover?
So, challenging myself physically, not something so I move my body, and I'm very careful to say move my body as opposed to working out because I think there's a lot of negative connotation surrounding workout. But I move my body in some form or fashion 7 days a week without question. Some days that looks like intense strength training. Some days that looks like a 10-mile run. Some days that looks like dancing to Beyonce in my kitchen or playing outside with my kids. But every day I move my body. And then I also feel like I am feeling my best when I'm working towards some kind of physical challenge. So I'm a runner, whether that's a half marathon, a full marathon. I've done mountain climbs before. Right now, I'm working with a new trainer virtually, which really was just like I can't do the physical challenges that I would want to do because I try and do a couple a year. So I hired a trainer just so I had something that I was sort of working toward and that someone else was measuring like, okay, how'd you do? And let's adjust and whatever. So having a physical challenge that I'm working towards is like I just love it. It's a big thing for me. And I also think is a really powerful thing for women, mamas especially, because I think sometimes we forget or maybe don't even know how powerful our bodies are. I mean, our bodies, for many of us, that looks like growing human and pushing it out, and yet we think that we're weak. And so the when I really started to understand how strong I was when I started running. And like felt so proud of I mean, I could barely walk a mile, let alone run when I started. And I remember doing my first 5K and I lived and I was like, "Holy crap, I am a superhero." So that's a big deal for me.
And now
Uh,
you have a marathon under your belt.
yes, I do. I do, and I really want to do another one. I actually had signed up for a triathlon when all of this, before everything happened, and then that sort of fell away. Wasn't very far into training, so it's not like, oh, I missed my chance to be an Ironman. But I'm excited to have that be something that gets to come back at some point. Uh, and then I already touched on this, but one of the things on my list is organized parenting. I really feel like I'm able to be the best mom that I can be if I have a plan ahead of time. And my kids don't have to know what that plan is, but if I'm organized and I already did the grocery shopping and I planned out the meals this week and we have a schedule, all of that, like then I feel like I can be the most present with them and I'm not missing out on things and I'm not worried about stuff that comes later. So that is a big part of me feeling healthy because I think as a mama of 4, feeling disconnected from my children is the most unhealthy I could feel. I emotionally, that would feel like I am living my life in the wrong way. And then the last thing that I would say, this is a daily piece for me and also part of just being the healthiest version that I can be, is visualizing and letting go. So visualizing, I would also call it manifesting and sort of making sure that you're focusing on where you want to go and what's the life that you want to live. Because I believe that if we don't keep our mind kind of rooted in what we want to create, it will slip back into things that have happened in the past, and you start worrying about stuff, that anxiety, or what if this happens again. And if you're in the health space, you understand the wiring of our brain is made to keep us safe. It's not made to keep us happy, and we will revert to kind of caveman like brain of like danger, 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 and we'll create danger even if none exists. So by visualizing this life I want to create, or this is what it's going to look like next summer when we could go on vacation again, or just whatever, is really powerful to sort of keep me either here in the present or forward focused. And the last part there is just learning to let go, and that's a daily reminder to myself. I have some physical cues that I give myself in my life to reset my intentions. And one of them is I have a salt lamp next to my bed, which I don't know if that's folklore. I don't know if it actually does anything, but it looks pretty. And so I bought one.
My wife and I
And
do the same thing. On each of
okay,
our nightstands, we have one.
okay,
It's just
great.
great.
I'm
If
not the only one.
anything, it's just great light, right? To read with
Right, it
before
is
bed or whatnot.
really good light, it is really good
Yeah.
light. But every single morning when I turn it on, this is part of my 5 a.m. thing too, I forgot to say. So every morning when I turn on that lamp, I my affirmation is, abundance and good energy flow to me, and I am grateful. And every night when I shut it off, I say, I let go of anything that does not serve me. And that has been a huge lesson in the last 6 months of, you are not responsible for other people's feelings. You're only responsible for your own. You cannot control someone else. You cannot fix someone else. You can only take care of that which you have stewardship over, which is myself and my kids. So I've learned to let go, and that is me at my best.
Lots of great stuff there. Thank you. And I know I got to let you go very soon here, but I think it's important for us to kind of come full circle and talk about this last year because it's been a really trying year for everybody. I mean, there's been a pandemic and we're still in the middle of that. There's so much uncertainty where this is all going. We're not, seeing an end in sight at this point. But you're in a really unique position where you're dealing with that, plus going through a divorce you mentioned earlier, plus you have this huge company and you manage all these people that are working underneath you. I think it's like 60 or 60 some employees. The space you're in now that's empty and managing rent and four kids. And we could, there's a lot going on with you. And you're continuing to, you ended up pivoting and putting out a different book during that year. And oh my goodness. So you have some serious resilience. And I'm sure you've built that up over the years in your 17 years of entrepreneurship. But let's talk about that year and where you're at now. And I'm sure a lot of these health strategies you just went over were helping you through that time. And I know you're still going through that time, but take us through that year and what you've done to get through all of that. And I'm sure a lot more and where you're at today.
2020 was the most brutal year of my life. And that is saying something. Uh, Not just because of the divorce, which was awful and so hard, but because of the company. I started this year with 60. I started last year with 60 employees, and I have 28. And that is the reality of owning a company built on events. I produced events, live events for people to meet up in person. And not only did I produce events, but also, like many people in the event space, you plan your events years, like at least a year, 18 months in advance. So we had events planned out, 2020 and beyond, that we've already paid deposits to, we've already, booked vendors. And when everything happened, it was like, you didn't get your money back. People didn't, I mean, it was devastating. We went from like, we're killing it, like so many people at the beginning of 2020, like, this is our year, 2020 vision, like, we're going to do it. to we're hemorrhaging millions of dollars, not hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. And I mean, God, the spring of 2020 was just every day waking up and like, okay, what are we doing? And how are we gonna, and okay, and if like, oh my, just the most intense stress I've ever felt in my life. And I, I just kept thinking, I really did, kept thinking of the marathon. So when I ran my marathon in LA, it was 92 degrees. I thought I was going to die the entire time, and actually, because it was unseasonably crazy hot, people were dropping, which is a super messes with your head, and, I hit mile 18, and I was just like, "I don't have this. I do not, and how in the heck am I supposed to get to mile 26?" And I was jogging so slow that, like, old ladies who are going to cheer for someone were, like, walking faster than me on the sidewalk, and I just kept thinking, like, just one foot in front of the other. Just one foot in front of the other. If you just keep putting one foot in front of the other, you are going to get to the finish line just one foot in front of the other. That's what 2020 felt like. Just keep showing up. I had a million coaching sessions with myself. If you just keep showing up, you will figure this out, but you can't figure this out in bed. And honestly, I got a lot of crap on the internet at the beginning of 2020 because I knew that I was not the only entrepreneur, the only parent, the only leader who could not hide, who could not pull the covers over their heads. Everybody was like, I'm just going to Netflix and, hang out till this is over. And I'm like, what a freaking privilege. Good for you. I am so glad that you get to chill. That is not something that many of us get to do. That is not something that our essential workers get to do right now. That is not something I fought desperately to keep jobs. That was the only thing I cared about in 2020 was keep people employed. And we didn't have to do our first round of layoffs until August. And I was devastated, devastated. And I had done everything that we could do, but you can't have an events company and have all these people who were there to produce live events, and you can't. So it was awful, and it was hard. And I do remember saying to myself, like, I think a lot of people, like, God, if you could just get to the end of this year, you're going to be so proud of yourself that you didn't quit. You're going to be so proud of yourself. And one of the things that I had people do last night in coaching was I said, what were the four biggest emotions that you felt in 2020? And at least one of them that you write down has to be positive, and at least one has to be negative. And one of the words I wrote down was proud, because it was the hardest year of my life, but I'm still here and I'm still going. I'm still figuring it out. And I am so proud of our team. I am so freaking proud of our team because I didn't do this by myself. We all, peed our pants for 9 months figuring out how to do, okay, we're going to switch and we're going to do virtual and we're going to sell product. And we threw everything at the wall to see what would stick, but we saved ourselves. And that's not something you can do in bed. It's not something you can do if you're not showing up. So it was a super hard year. And I'm feeling so good about this one, and not because, like, suddenly, the sky's raining money. We started to talk about this, and I didn't sort of give you this thought. You had asked about scarcity. Scarcity, when I was younger versus now. And definitely, I think in times of extreme stress, we revert back to a younger version of ourselves. I don't think like, oh, you just have all these problems that you haven't figured out. I think that you had things that happened to you at different ages in your life. And when the sort of negative coping mechanisms happen, I think oftentimes it's like the younger version of you, that happened to them. They learned this as a coping mechanism, and so this is what's coming out now. And when everything happened last year, my place that I reverted to was scarcity. Go, hustle, figure it out as fast as you can, do all the things. And it took me, I did a lot of therapy this last year to remind myself of what I believe. And what I believe is, I believe in abundance. I believe that God's going to take care of me. The universe is going to take care of me. I'm going to have faith that it will all work out as it's meant to. And me hustling and thinking like, oh, there's not enough money and I need to do more. That's not actually what attracts money and wealth and abundance to your life. So I am reminded of that as I ended last year and started this one of like, it's all going to be great. It's all going to be great. I'm going to move forward in faith and I'm going to sort of vibrate at that frequency and keep going on.
Well, you have a great attitude about it all, and yeah, like I said before, we're still in the middle of this. We don't know where it's all going, but continuing to wish you all the best. And I loved your latest book. Didn't see that coming. Other than listeners and viewers getting a copy of that, how can they connect with you?
I'm on social. I do a really fun weekly show on YouTube if you just want to laugh. And Instagram is also the platform that I'm most hanging out on if I'm posting anything. So yeah, you can check me out on Instagram. I'm Ms. Rachel Hollis.
Rach Talk is back. I
Rachel,
caught the
you
first
know,
two of them. Yeah, oh yeah, I've
good.
caught the
Yeah.
first two. It's great.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah, that's an
Awesome.
old show we used to do. We brought it back for fun.
Good. Well, we're going to link everything up in the show notes. Rachel, really enjoyed chatting with you. And again, wishing you all the best.
Thank you, Jesse. I appreciate it.
Thank you.